Okay, so I actually have some pretty decent news about the Asus ZenBook S16. After a lot, and I do mean a lot of testing back and forth with other people in the community, I have a working laptop with a very large SSD inside. Um, in fact, again, with Asus saying that even 2 TB was impossible, having an 8 TB drive in there should have been completely outside of the scope of any reasonable expectation. But what we found through poking and prodding through various people testing things for Samsung drives, for all kinds of Sabrent rockets and etc., we found that the primary driver, what was causing, well, I shouldn't say what was causing, but what we were seeing being the issue was anything using the Psion controller. So this one was weird because that is, by volume, one of the most prevalent controllers out there for SSDs. But that one, and all of its family derivatives, anything that was using that style controller, whether that be, old drives, new drives, high-speed drives, less performant drives, anything that was in that model family, all had issues. And then beyond that, there were additional issues, some of them being the chassis itself. Again, just design limitations. I'm not going to say that this was completely impossible, but it did definitely damper some of our testing as well. So to give you a little bit of backstory and kind of line of events, if you haven't followed the other videos or any of the back and forth on this Asus ZenBook S16, was that I really wanted to like this laptop. It was amazing by all rights. It was perhaps one of the best laptops that I've used in quite some time. Again, well made, just does everything that I wanted it to do until I got to the point where, reading reviews, watching other reviewers do stuff, there was a very notable piece in most articles that said, oh yeah, the SSD is easy to get to, super simple swap and good to go. Unfortunately, none of these reviewers actually tried that, because if they had, they would have experienced pain and suffering on a completely different level. Because that's exactly what I did when I bought it, because again, this is one of those where laptop manufacturers take the easy, cheaper way out. It's unfortunate, but it's just kind of the world that we live in at this point. And so they equip a very high-end, amazing laptop with a bottom tier hard drive. So you get a thin and light with 1 TB and 2 available ports. So one port is required for power, and then you have another port for whatever you want. Unfortunately, if you wanted more storage, you either had to connect an external drive, losing said port, or suffer. So the simple solution was to pop out that original drive, pop in a new drive, and away you go. And I immediately grabbed a Sabrent drive because I use a lot of Sabrent drives, really like their stuff. They make really good products, and booted it up. Well, I would say booted up. I tried to post, saw the drive very briefly, and then nothing happened. I went into the BIOS. There's no drive detected at all. I'm puzzled. Did I get a bad drive? What happened here? So take the drive out, put it into a different computer, immediately recognized, and now I'm even more confused. Put it back into the computer. Then I start emailing ASUS support. ASUS support, and I'll cut this back significantly, but ASUS support was completely incompetent. After weeks and weeks and weeks of going around in circles, the final declaration from ASUS is that there is no qualified vendor list, there never will be, and they only support the drive that it's shipped with. Again, it was very frustrating to have an actual issue and know that a BIOS code update could fix this, but I just couldn't get through to them. So that was where it stopped. Where I was able to make some progress, though, was a couple of posts on Reddit. So on Reddit, there was an original poster that had come through and said, well, this isn't working. Does anybody else see this? Is my unit bugged? And then, again, 2 or 3 other people chimed in. I chimed in, and then collectively started testing different drives. And there was an individual that tested a Western Digital drive, and it worked. Again, I was confused because that shouldn't... Again, what ASUS support said was that it's a drive size limitation. Again, should never occur. Again, I could dive way too deeply into the technicals on that. I won't, but the fact that it would be a size limitation would be very weird. Very, very weird. But, so, once that user had come through and said that there was progress on Western Digital and there was progress on Samsung, I started testing both. Of the two, I felt more confident with the Samsung drives. I've used them before, and so I went out and grabbed a Samsung, I think it was 990 Pro. Let's see. Maybe. Yeah, it was a 990 Pro, 4.0, 2 terabyte drive. This guy right here, I don't know. Yeah, there we go. And did some testing with this as well. Unfortunately, what I found, though, was that while it did work and I was able to break past the 1 terabyte limit, I kept having very weird issues. And those I was able to trace down to thermal issues. So with the thin and light, that is the ZenBook S16, there's not a lot of heat dissipation properties for the drives. So I was able to get it to limp along by doing some thermal pads and other things to help dissipate the heat. And it was okay for a daily driver. I didn't experience too many crashes, but if you ever did any large data transfers, you could tell, you could kind of feel it stutter, and then you open up hardware monitor, boom, the whole thing's toast. It's just, it got too hot too fast and it can't help it, so it just shuts it down. There are a couple of options inside the Samsung Magician to cripple the drive and get it working that way, but in all honesty, that really wasn't a viable option. So, again, someone on the Reddit forum was going through and said that, Western Digital was the other one that worked. So I went out and picked up a Western Digital SN850X, and this was the game changer. So the SN850X came in, worked, and did not encounter thermal issues. Again, caveat being, I just immediately put thermal pads on there, but it was much easier to tame than the Samsung drive was. And everything is working. In addition to that, 8 terabytes are working. So now I have a computer that I can put anything I want on there. Well, I shouldn't say anything I want, but a vast majority of things on here. And it's not my limiting factor. So what I enjoy doing and what I really kind of wanted to do with this laptop originally was to do a lot of, again, travel stuff for work and things like that, and be able to take my camera with me, shoot 8K RAW, and then dump it onto the laptop so that I could keep doing things. But with a 1 terabyte shipped drive, that was simply impossible. Again, with 8K RAW footage, about 256 gigs equates to a couple of minutes of footage. So if you're doing any, reasonable record limits using 8K ProRes RAW, it isn't going to happen. So having a bit more storage space really helps in that, because then I can take, I'm not going to do a monster video editing project there on the fly, but it gives me enough space to dump in a CF Express card and go out and grab a little bit more footage. Maybe trim it, but, for all intents and purposes, it gives me a little bit to work with without having to worry about external storage and all of those other things. It gives me a good base to work off of. And again, it gives me the flexibility to do what I want to do. Whereas the way that Asus was spinning this was that, you don't need that. I need what I need. Please don't try and get in my lane. Again, it was so frustrating because the idea and premise behind it was that Asus could take such an amazing product and just cut the legs out from underneath it. So anyway, on to actual. This is going to be a screenshot. This is not a live shot because I am recording this on my computer and not the laptop. But I did want to share this real quick, and so what you're going to see here is that you can have the Western Digital Black SN850X 8TB drive. You can see our read and write performance. Not amazing on read and write performance here, but overall pretty good. And then on the left-hand side, what I'm showing you is the temperature range. So the temperature range during heating cooling process, much tamer. The Samsung drive was well into the 60s and seemed to have a shutoff limit at about 68. I'm assuming it was a little bit higher than that because the numbers trail a little bit. But somewhere in there was where the hard drive would just kind of shut itself down. And then other than that, everything was just moving along quite nicely. So this gives the laptop the breath of fresh air that it really needed. And for me, makes this laptop much more viable to recommend to people. I still am hesitant because Asus really ticked me off with their lackluster support, but I cannot argue the fact that for a laptop that is this thin, just unfathomably thin, you can get that level of performance in there. It is just unreal. And so, come on, look at that. That is a gorgeous finish on this laptop as well. But overall, this moves this product from being frustrating to back into doing what I want it to do. So overall, I think this was going to be a short, sweet video, a little bit too ranty, I guess, but overall, I just wanted to get the data out there that if you do need a very large drive, I'm going to recommend anything with a Western Digital controller. It does not have to be the 850X. Anything that is not a Scion controller is going to be your go-to. Maybe Asus will fix this later, and they'll get compatibility back up to par with every other device that's been made in the last 10 years. But until then, this is going to be kind of my go-to recommendation. Pick any other controller. So it's going to have to be from Samsung or from Western Digital. I'm trying to think of another controller off the top of my head. There are a couple, but they're pretty rare. So again, for your primary drivers, I'm just going to say Western Digital and Samsung. And then from there, pick a drive that makes sense for you, size-wise, performance-wise, with the caveat that the chassis is not super well suited to very hot drives. And especially, again, you're looking at needing a couple of thermal pads. I'm going to recommend for the bottom of the SSD, so as it sits in there and folds down, bottom is going to be pretty well suited with a 1.5 millimeter. And then the top is going to vary. I was getting pretty decent results with 2 millimeters for the top of the drive to the bottom of the chassis. And so in between those two, thermals look pretty good. Again, responsiveness is great. Able to move very large files over there and relatively quickly as well. Again, it's got the 40 gigabit USB 4 ports, so when you're really needing to transfer data and you've got the appropriate pathing for it, it'll transfer it. So All right, this is going to be it for me on the Asus ZenBook S16. Again, pretty positive movement on this one from me. So I hope you guys have a wonderful time and that this helps at least one person out there.